Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today we're going to do a little fun game design experiment. Now, as many of you know, every month or two I release some free RPG adventures on my website, along with my game design thoughts behind them. Usually, I make these adventures available for my three favorite systems: Call of Cthulhu, GURPS, and Dungeons & Dragons. Now, this video is not to decide which of those systems is better. I really love all three. I think Call of Cthulhu is amazing for horror adventures. Dungeons & Dragons is great for high fantasy and still makes one of the best introductions into the hobby. And GURPS is a fantastic tool set for so many genres that don't normally get a lot of love, like cliffhanging, pulp action, gritty low fantasy, and science fiction. But in which system are you most likely to survive an attack by a deep one? For those of you not familiar, a deep one is an iconic horror monster created by H.P. Lovecraft. They're amphibious, immortal monsters that worship Cthulhu and occasionally mate with humans. Deep ones and creatures like them appear in so many adventures. They're the main reason why Call of Cthulhu players don't go anywhere near lighthouses. So as I port adventures from one system to another, I often ask myself, how will this system change my adventure? This is more than just about game balance. I think some systems do certain types of stories better than others. If I want a game where an angry peasant with a pitchfork is a danger to the PCs, Call of Cthulhu or GURPS generally works better than Dungeons & Dragons. On the other hand, Dungeons & Dragons heroes can fight off hordes of monsters easier. So as a game designer, when I bring an adventure to a system, I have to think about how the game mechanics will collide with the storytelling I'm trying to do. Not all systems support all types of stories. So while writing a new adventure, I found myself wondering exactly how dangerous is a deep one to a lone player character. Let's paint a picture. It's a lonely night in 1933. A swaggering gangster, let's call him Skeet Skitshaw, is taking a stroll along the pier, thinking hard how he's gonna climb up the gangster ladder. Life hasn't been easy, but he's young and tough and he's got big plans. And just as he thinks of an idea how he can take over the town, he turns around and sees a humanoid fish monster emerge from the river and lunge towards him, hungry to take him back to his lair for who knows what.
Oh, as your Lovecraft scholar, I can tell you exactly what.
Using a bit of math, a bit of simulation, lots of hand waving, and some creativity, I found out how Skeet Skitshaw fares in each of those games. First, some ground rules. In each fight, I'm going to assume that Skeet Skitshaw passes his sanity check, fright check, fear save, or whatever. He's going to fight this deep one perfectly sane and calm. Second, RPGs have a lot of variables in their combat system, so I'm going to pick a pretty straightforward path through this fight. Now, with a little bit of thought or a different approach, I'm pretty positive that you can find a way to get a different outcome. But here we go. Let's start out with Call of Cthulhu, since that's the baseline for this kind of encounter. We're going to assume that Skeet is a standard investigator. He's a gangster, so he has a firearm skill of 60% and uses a .38 revolver, which does 1d10 damage and has 6 shots. I gave him a small knife as a backup weapon, and a brawl skill of 60%. He's tough and has 12 hit points. Deep ones in Call of Cthulhu are pretty nasty. They have a strength of 70% and 13 hit points. They're sprinters with a move of 8. They attack once each round with their claws, and have a reasonable fight skill of 45%, doing 1d6 plus 1d4 damage. Their scaly hide provides 1 point of armor. In Call of Cthulhu, anyone with a gun almost always goes first, so Skeet's gonna pull out his revolver the moment he sees the deep one and fire at it as it closes in. That's a 60% chance of inflicting about 6 points of damage. Now this first turn is critical, because if Skeet can inflict more than 7 points of damage on the deep one, he inflicts a major wound and has a chance of just knocking the deep one right out. And because he's using a revolver, he can fire up to 3 rounds that first turn, with all those shots getting a penalty die. This drops his effective skill to around 36%, making him likely to hit once or twice. That's a lot of potential damage in that first turn, and you're going to see in a moment how important that is. Call of Cthulhu handles melee combat as opposed rules. The Deep One has a lower brawl school, which means that Skeet's going to generally win, knifing the Deep One for about 2 points of damage each time he does. But when the Deep One hits, those claws hurt, inflicting about 6 points of damage each time. When I ran a simulation of this battle 100,000 times, Skeet won about 27% of the time. Now, from a storytelling perspective, what's really interesting is that the majority of those wins happen that first turn before the Deep One even gets to Skeet. So as a game master, if I didn't give Skeet the chance to react before he saw the Deep One and it was on him, his survival drops to less than 1% of the time. Especially since you can't fire a gun in close combat in Call of Cthulhu. That one change makes a huge difference to how this plays out. If I house ruled something, and maybe I said that Skeet could fire one shot in melee combat with a penalty die, his odds of survival go up a little bit, about 10% or so. So that's actually a decent and fair rules change.
But what kind of keeper would be nice and do that?
But rules as written, Skeet's in big trouble with a 27% chance of surviving a Deep One attack. All right, now we're moving on to 5th edition. How to handle Skeet is a little bit more subjective here, but I'm gonna make him a 3rd level fighter. I'll give him a dexterity of 16, defensive fighting style, and a leather jacket for armor class 15. I'll be generous and call his .38 revolver a heavy pistol using the rules from the Spy Game supplement. So that's 1d10 piercing damage with a +5 to hit between his proficiency bonus and his dexterity modifier. With a decent constitution, Skeet has 28 hit points at 3rd level. I'll give him a dagger as well for 1d4 +3 damage, which is about the same as that revolver. I think this is a little weird, but we'll go with it. Now, according to Sandy Peterson's Cthulhu supplement, Deep Ones are a challenge rating 1 monster. They have armor class 14, 52 hit points. They get 2 claw attacks for +5 to hit, doing 1d6 +3 slash damage each. This seems like a pretty straightforward combat. In a hand-to-hand fight, the Deep One has almost twice the hit points, twice the attacks, and twice the damage output. So when I simulated this combat 100,000 times, even taking into account Skeet's second wind and action surge, he ends up dying 97% of the time, and he's sleeping with the fishes.
That joke is remarkably on point.
And this is a big but. D&D Deep Ones are slow, moving at only 20 feet per turn. This means that Skeet could run away 100% of the time. It also means that if he wants to stay and fight, he can disengage and continue to use his pistol at range. He might suffer from some opportunity attacks every now and then, but this is still a huge advantage because it constantly takes away one of the Deep One's 2 attacks. If Skeet uses this hit and run strategy, his odds of survival go up a lot. He lives 20% of the time, and that's closer to that Call of Cthulhu number. Now, I'm sure you Dungeons & Dragons players are already way ahead of me and thinking, what if we made Skeet a rogue? Because then he gets a cunning action, he can disengage as a bonus action every turn, never suffer any opportunity attacks, and easily win this fight. I think this disparity is a great example of why challenge ratings don't really work in Dungeons & Dragons. A direct approach to this fight has a 3% chance of survival. A clever tactical approach has a 20% chance of working. And a smart rogue, well, he wins 100% of the time.
Can we please not tell the rogue players that?
But for the final result, I'll keep Skeet a fighter and say that even with all of his fancy footwork, he has a 20% chance of avoiding a horrible death. Let's move on to the final game system, GURPS, a system with a reputation for realism and deadliness. In GURPS, Skeet is similar to his other counterparts. He has strength 12 and dexterity 12. I gave him a good gun skill of 13 and a knife skill of 13. For those of you unfamiliar with GURPS, you generally want to roll equal to or under your skill with 3 6-sided dice. So with a skill of 13, Skeet has about an 85% chance of succeeding. But GURPS also gives defenders lots of options like dodging and parrying to completely negate an attack, so Skeet's effective chance of hitting the Deep One is probably about 50-50. I gave him the same .38 revolver, which does 2d6 piercing damage. Like its Call of Cthulhu counterpart, this revolver has 6 shots and can fire up to 3 rounds in a single turn. For the deep ones, I use GURPS Cthulhu Punk as my reference. They're formidable. They have a strength of 13, dexterity of 12, and health of 12. They have sharp claws, which do 1d6 cutting damage with a single attack each turn. Their scales give them 1 point of damage resistance. Unlike the Dungeons & Dragons version, this deep one isn't slow. His speed matches Skeet's speed. GURPS is also more simulation-y, so technically, unless Skeet has the fast draw skill, he's not going to be able to pull out that revolver and get a shot off before the deep one's on him. So to even this out a little bit, I gave Skeet a fast draw skill of 12, which gives him a chance of drawing and firing once the combat begins. The more interesting thing is that GURPS allows guns to be fired in close combat. That 38 can be fired up close at only a -2 penalty, and GURPS doesn't really penalize players for unloading into their opponents. But Skeet still only got 6 bullets in that revolver, so every shot's going to count. As it turns out, that gun does make a big difference, because Skeet's going to get off all 6 shots as the deep one closes in with him. So even if he misses with half the shots, he still drops the deep one to negative hit points, and now our poor fishman's got to roll every single turn to stay conscious. In my simulation of 100,000 combats, Skeet won 49% of the time. What surprised me, though, was that less than 10% of those wins happened on the first couple turns of combat. Even with that revolver blasting away and hitting, the deep one is going to survive to get up close and last a few rounds before he finally drops. That's a big difference from the Call of Cthulhu version, where the vast majority of Skeet's wins happened on the very first turn. This shows that even with GURPS' reputation for deadliness, this combat is going to last long enough to put both of these guys in the hospital.
Deep ones having hospitals is not canon.
Okay. A deep one charging a skilled gun-wielding investigator is in serious trouble, but Skeet's not going to walk away unscathed almost any of the time. And if I start adding on some of the more realistic GURPS rules, this fight gets harder and harder for Skeet. For example, if I said that the dim lighting on the dock wasn't great and Skeet's going to suffer a -3 darkness penalty for his attacks, his survival rate plummets into the 15% range. But the final result for GURPS? This one's a coin toss, with Skeet winning 49% of the time. And as a gangster might say, that ain't half bad. So the final results are, in this encounter, the deadliest game system goes to Dungeons & Dragons, where Skeet only has a 20% chance of survival. Then Call of Cthulhu, where he has a 27% chance of living. And finally GURPS, where Skeet has a 49% chance of living to tell this tale. Now, I did all this math pretty quickly, and I know tactics and character design can really alter the outcome of an encounter in any of these game systems. But the game design lesson here is that the same encounter can play out very differently depending on what game system you're using. In Call of Cthulhu, poor Skeet's fate is really set by the time the deep one gets to him. He's got to shoot fast. In GURPS, the fight's going to almost always go the distance and end up in a bloody brawl, while in Dungeons & Dragons, knowing how to take advantage of the opportunity attack rules, that makes the difference between certain death and a chance to survive. So the next time somebody new to your favorite game system asks, how do I balance my encounters?
Might I suggest an Elder God to balance things out?
Take an extra few minutes to have empathy for their plight. This is hard stuff that takes years of experience to get right. And of course, as a game master, your job is to make sure everybody has fun. Nobody really wants to play in a game where the chances of survival are 20%. Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video, please hit that like button. If you're interested in more game design advice, along with free adventures for all 3 of these game systems, check out my blog at oneshotadventures.com. Until next time, I'm JC, and watch that river for deep ones. You probably don't have a chance.